Well, welcome, folks. We wanted to get together today and talk about some of the things that have really been coming to light with the work that we're doing with our clients. And it's so important to talk about some of these things. And some of them are really tough topics, quite frankly. And we're going to weave in how mindfulness works and how we address these things and some of the things that are really emerging with the work in the work that we're doing with our clients. It's a whole different set of things that are popping up, and everybody's talking about this new normal, and the reality is, what can we do to help create what this new normal will be, and how do you deal with these shifting sands? And from a leadership standpoint, it runs the gamut from doing everything virtually to some of the really dire things in terms of employees passing on or getting sick, and just all these different things that we have found in our work that the leaders are just uh, they're having a tough time. There's no doubt about it, and that's what we're here to do, is help them and hopefully help you today as we talk about some of these things. So Matt and I are going to kick some of these things
Mhm.
around and just share some of the things that we have learned over the last few weeks in particular, and hopefully shed some light on some of those and give you some options in terms of what you can do about it. So Matt, where are we
Yep.
going to go
Yeah.
first? What topic?
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So let's just move through these questions and let's and statements or thoughts, if you will, and we'll just start with the first is a question, and it's how to lead through fear. So how do we as leaders in this uncertain time, how do we lead through this? And do you want to kick it off, Drayton, and give us your
Yeah,
thoughts first?
it's so interesting in the conversations we're having with folks now. We hit things head on. We tell people that we kind of have this velvet whip that we address things with, and we do it with love and kindness, certainly. But we ask them right up front, how are they doing with the whole fear piece? And what we have found is that a lot of these leaders are taking it on, and it's kind of like that Coke bottle, right? You keep pushing things down, you pushing things down, and something's going to explode because it's full of the CO2, and it's just. And we're finding that a lot of these folks are just taking their fear as leaders and just stuffing it down, and they think they have to show up from this place of service, that it's all about taking care of their people, which is wonderful. And certainly that's a huge part of our duty and responsibility as leaders to do so. And the reality is, every single leader that we're talking to is afraid. They're afraid of this, from everything. It runs the gamut. They're afraid for their families. They're afraid for
Mm-hmm.
their own health. They're afraid for all of their peers. They're afraid for the existence of the organization. They're afraid for, of the fact that will we get back to the way things used to be? And so we help them work through this fear. And the first thing that needs to happen is owning it. And we get them to spend some time thinking about it. And, we talk about quiet time and meditation, etc. And we get them to spend time addressing it head on. One of the things we
Mm-hmm.
did, Matt, you'll recall in the webinar we did just last week, we help people bring in the fear. Like when it comes up, we don't avoid it. We don't do, this, oh, I'll deal with that later, or, ooh, I don't want to think about that. I'm going to be super optimistic and not talk about being fearful. And we teach people through mindfulness and deep breathing to let that fear come in
Mm-hmm.
and experience it in your body. And when you do that, you disarm it. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's not the first time you do it that this happens, but it takes its iterations. And
Mm-hmm.
over time, as you address the fear, quote unquote, head on, and you let it into your experience, you will find that the power is diminished. And so that's one of the first things that we help folks with, is just for the leader, and this, we're talking personal leadership. This is not just leaders of organizations. This is personal leadership. Help
Mm-hmm.
them to deal with their own fear. And part of that is owning up to their teams and their families and their friends that they're afraid. You know, the old days of this militaristic hierarchy in an organization where everybody's supposed to be 10 feet tall and bulletproof, it doesn't cut it nowadays. So the reality is, you know, we need to come clean with people about being afraid. Everyone is
Mm-hmm.
afraid now. I don't care if it's the CEO of a huge corporation or the person working at the grocery store. Everybody's afraid.
Yeah.
And we're human beings. And so we need to own that and be
Mm-hmm.
really upfront with folks about it. So as in, and with the understanding, as we work with people, we say the first thing that everybody has to realize is that every single person is afraid. And the first thing you need to do is help folks deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
They are not going to be able to get their work done in a great fashion, and they're not going to be able to do all these things you expect of them and think that, you know, that we'll just keep pace as we used to before the COVID-19 kicked in. The reality is you have to help your folks deal with their fear before
Mm-hmm.
anything meaningful is going to happen. And you can't avoid it, and you can't just, you know, ignore it and think they're going to be putting in their 40, 50 hours a week like they used to. They've got kids at home, they've got spouses or significant others that have lost jobs, they've got people that they know that are sick, or maybe someone in their family. They are afraid. So the first topic that folks need to talk about is this fear. And as a
Mm-hmm.
leader, being completely vulnerable with these folks and say, yeah, I'm afraid. I'm afraid too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Matt, you know, one of the things that's so interesting now too is that, you know, everybody's going with the Zoom thing like we're doing now. And um, I've talked to so many folks really in this past week in particular, where they're doing these Zoom meetings and they're getting crickets. And I believe it's because they're they're taking that, you know, everything's normal attitude, and we're just having a business meeting, and these undercurrents are there, and people, they may be looking at a screen, but in their mind they're going, okay, do we have enough groceries for this weekend?
Mm-hmm.
You know, my mom is by herself, and how am I going to help her? Or
Mm-hmm.
my kid didn't get his lesson from school completed today, and all these things are going in their heads, and yet you've got a leader up here, yak 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 yak, and
Mm-hmm.
all this other stuff is going on, and therefore you get the crickets because the real thing hasn't been addressed.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, right?
It is.
And I think it's a new word in a lot of ways to bring into the workplace. Fear isn't talked
Yeah,
about
that's
often, if at all. And it's interesting to get a new sensation brought into the workplace that we need to deal with. And we're both mountain guys, and fear is real when you talk about how you're moving through the mountains. And we always talk about fears, it's healthy. It's a
yeah.
healthy, normal feeling, and it's a tool, and it's there to be used as such, right? And it's smart to be fearful in a lot of ways throughout this whole period. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, you should be afraid, right? And that said, what should you do? You should be wearing your mask and eating healthy and taking care of your body and having all this self-awareness. So I think it's just recognizing that fear is a rational feeling, and it's there to serve a purpose,
Yeah.
and to embrace it. You know, let everyone feel it, feel that feeling, embrace it, and don't let it stop you, right? And it shouldn't paralyze folks. You should just recognize it and let it be there as the tool and serve its purpose, and then continue on.
I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, two points I took away from what you just said is that it's a word that we haven't really introduced or talked about much in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it's new nomenclature for folks, and they just need to go there and throw the
Mm-hmm.
word out. I mean, you and I talk a lot about bringing love into the workplace, and how that
Yep.
freaks people out, and HR, we can't say love. Well, it's kind of the same way with fear. As leaders, we've thought that we need to be 10 feet tall and bulletproof, and we never show our fear, and we're stoic,
Mm-hmm.
and, it's not going to impact us, and take that hill. And that's just a different mindset. And that's
Mm-hmm.
so 1950s to 1980s, really. And it doesn't exist today. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, the other piece about looking at this as something that can be healthy and something that is something to be embraced is a
Mm-hmm.
really good way to look at that is, okay, we're afraid, all of us are afraid. How do we take that and not necessarily turn it into a positive and think that let's just flip it as, eternal
Mm-hmm.
optimists will do, but
Right.
more, how do we take the beauty of that, like we were talking about breathing in the fear and feeling it
Mm-hmm.
in your body, and then with that new awareness, do something really cool with it.
Yeah, as a leader, just let that fear inform our decisions that we make and how we're showing up and what are we doing on a daily basis. And again, it's another ingredient added to our daily life that we're moving through right now.
Yeah. And I think just recognizing the fact that it's going to be an what we perceive to be as an awkward conversation as leaders because
Mm-hmm.
we're not used to going there,
Mm-hmm.
and embracing that. And we've always said that the growth lies in the discomfort. So this is
Yeah.
a perfect example of, you're going to have a
Mm-hmm.
level of discomfort when you talk about these things.
Yeah, I was just thinking you were saying that it's getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah,
So it's a practice, and you just
it
need
is.
to recognize it. So
It absolutely is. And
yeah.
along those lines too, when we talk about, and a lot of this is, certainly focused on the mindful leader piece that we're leading the charge on. It's when you're in that place of fear, go back to your breath. So
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have a tough phone call with employees. Maybe you've laid off employees. We've talked to people who laid off hundreds of employees, and that's reality. So give yourself some love, and go quiet before you have to deliver some news like this, or have some of those, crucial conversations with people, and just focus on the breath, and
Mm-hmm.
modulate your breath, and focus on your body, and how things are sitting in your body and where they're sitting in your body, and just get back to center before you do these things. Where so
Mm-hmm.
much of this, it's interesting that it's this adrenaline rush, and it's like we go into this is fight or flight almost, the amygdala part of our brain, that reptilian part of our brain, that for weeks now we've been on edge, ready for battle, and we've been in this fight or flight. And there's just, what I'm seeing now is this exhaustion, right? The
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline's wearing off, and all of a sudden it's, some of these things are coming home to roost physically or mentally with folks, and they're just wrung out. And
Mm-hmm.
so self-care is so important during this time, and it's not selfish. It's not like you're, being self-centered and taking care of yourself. That has to happen first before you can care for others.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Should we shift a little bit
Let's do it.
in nature? But the question is how to embrace our current state. How do we soak in this moment in a lot of ways, and what do we do?
Yeah, and you and I were just chatting just a few minutes ago about this, and the kind of the stoic approach to the world, and Amar Fati, and that's just, love your fate, embrace your fate. And it's one of those things, as a mindful leader, one of the first things we talk to people about is living in the present moment. And when you're in the present moment and you are observing your thoughts without judgment,
Mm-hmm.
the only place to be is there. It's not over your shoulder looking in your rear view mirror about stuff that's happened, which you can't do anything about. It's not the future state, which I know I tended to live in for so long, about next, next goal, next achievement, next, milestone about things. It's more, loving where you are today and loving your fate. And the reality is, when we're in that moment and see it as so precious, it puts everything in a whole different light. And that if you're thankful for this breath that you're taking in at this moment, you're not worrying about that thing tomorrow that may or may not happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping people stay in that present moment, observe their thoughts without judgment, and be there, first of all, for yourself and your self-care, and be there for others when you're fully present. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think of, when you bring that up. It's just staying in this moment where there's beauty, there's everything that we need in this moment, and coming from that place of gratitude for having this moment, because that's all we ever have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's, when I think of amor fati, I also think about what are the lessons that we can learn right now from this experience. And would would I have chosen to be sheltered in place right now? No.
Yeah.
But that said, I mean, loving the fate, loving the situation that I'm in, how do I embrace that? And what is to be learned by this time that I'm spending by myself? Or how can I learn to reach out to other folks and learn to find that gratitude in the moment, in that present moment, like you said, or live with, make sure I'm not approaching things with judgment and I'm being of service every day, and really just owning where we're at right now.
And as you were saying that, it really brought up for me the philosophy that the greatest journey we'll ever take is within, it's not outside.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
embracing this time as a wonderful opportunity to go within. I got to look at these greater things. What are the wonderful things that are happening, the gifts that we're finding in these things, from
Mm-hmm.
air pollution's diminished, and all these incredibly cool things that are happening,
Mm-hmm.
and going within, and going in that journey on terms of, okay, so how am I showing up, and
Yeah.
what am I learning about myself in this moment? And it's
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's the old saying that courage is not built, it's revealed. and
Sure.
and we're revealing a lot about ourselves, and it starts with a
Mm-hmm.
journey within, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how we're going to deal with what we're finding when we go there.
Yeah, I think we're recognizing that this is happening for us, not to us.
Absolutely.
I love that saying, amor fati. Let's keep moving here. I'm looking at my notes. This is one that's been interesting, and this is relevant to a lot of our clients, and it maybe is a little bit more tactical in nature. But the question that we've been discussing with a lot of our partners is how is this remote work situation impacting traditional organizational structures? And for some folks that are already working, in a remote working situation, this isn't new. But for a lot of folks, I don't know what percent folks work at home. It's certainly on the 20 side of that 80-20. But how do you really deal with this as a leader, and what does this how does this impact how you are moving through your daily agenda with your team, and what does this really reveal about your organization and your leadership style, and how do we do this successfully?
I think one of the really cool byproducts of what's happening now is that we collectively as kind of the business community haven't spent a lot of time questioning the things that we do in terms of
Mm-hmm.
how we're structured, how we're doing business. And it really, when you look back from a history perspective, the corporate structure and the way we operated from this autocratic way of doing things came from the military. And that served us really well through, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and up until, for a lot of companies, until very recently. And the reality is there has been these incremental pushbacks, if you will, people starting to go a little more virtually and telecommuting and flex hours and all these different things have kind of bubbled up. And that's just these tiny little things that have just kind of been emerging. And Microsoft just did their big analysis about people working remotely and found out productivity went up 40%. And so the data is starting to catch up with that. And the reality is we're force fed now.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any say so in this. We got to figure it out. And the companies that have figured out some of the virtual work certainly are ahead of the game. But the reality is, I think it's starting to get the leaders to question everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the old hierarchy and all these different strata of the organizational chart. And I think it's going to flatten everything. This is my personal opinion. I think that there's going to be more of this matrix and team, and some organizations certainly have embraced this over time. But I think the organizations that haven't are going to really, right now, forced to relook at how they're structured
Mm-hmm.
and how they go about doing business and bringing bodies into a big building every day and having them spend, stuff, gas money and time and burning up stuff in the environment. And I think that all of us are rethinking the way we're doing business. And with that goes the hierarchy and the structural piece. And I just think things are going to get flattened. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the other really cool thing that I'm hearing happening is that some people at some of the lower levels that have kind of just been doing their jobs and under the radar, some of these folks are just popping up like, shooting stars.
Mm-hmm.
And they've embraced this and they've figured out, okay, I can thrive. It's like they've remade themselves. So they figured out that they can thrive in this environment because of X, Y, and Z. And I think it's just help people shift in a lot of ways their thinking in terms of where they may fit into the organization. And I think you look at ultimately from a metric standpoint and from an expense standpoint, I think we're going to rethink a lot of how we're spending money with getting people into offices. And
Yeah.
that I think it's going to shift.
Yeah, I think the shift is a focus on outcomes, right? And that's what everyone's moving towards. When you talk about remote work, everyone's focused on
Yeah.
their role and what they are able to provide to the organization, and all in the pursuit of the best outcome, as opposed to the old button seat. So I love this. I think this is the good, one of the good things that may come out of this, and it's that, that smack to the head, that duh moment, like, oh, okay, we don't need to be in the office.
Yeah.
And it's been hard to motivate folks to embrace this, remote work opportunity. And so I think this forcing function is again, back to our Morph IT love of fate, we're loving that we're learning the lesson of how you can remote work successfully and embrace that. So I do hope that people continue this method and continue the openness of having employees contributing and focusing on outcomes from home, and we don't go back, to the old way, quote unquote. So it'll be
Some
interesting to
will.
see how this one.
Some
Yeah.
will. I think one of the really, really interesting things that's going to happen is that if indeed we're going down that path, and I think that we're there, what happens on the social side? Because businesses have been such as, the universe for a lot of people from a social standpoint. So what's going to shift for people? Where are they going to find that? How are these new groups going to emerge that support them? How are they going to
Mm-hmm.
find these new communities? How are the existing communities within organizations going to reform in a different, even cooler way when you
Mm-hmm.
can't stop by and, share a cup of coffee with somebody in the office? What's going to replace that? Because people need that. And I think that's where,
Mm-hmm.
as leaders, we need to be thinking about that in terms of exploring that right now with people. How are we going to replace this whole social aspect and
Mm-hmm.
modify it, and maybe not replace it, but it's going to be new and it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
different. And so how are we open to what that new thing may look like, and how do we support it from an organizational standpoint?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we always talk about the walking meetings and going to grab coffee and using the parks that we have available to us. Now, of course, this is all post, the shelter in place rules, but once we're able to interact again, yeah, it will be interesting to see that you do need that face-to-face time, and there's an appropriate conversations and experiences, and you got to build your culture, and you need to interact with folks. But how do you do it? Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this
Yeah, we will.
unfolds. And there's tons of opportunities
Yeah.
outside the workplace. We always talk about it when people are in there, getting them out. So
Exactly.
now they're out. So
Yeah,
what do
they're
we
out.
do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be really cool to see how this evolves.
Let's just keep things moving to our final topic, which is, yeah, this is a good one. This is a good way to end. And we wanted to talk a little bit about the emergence of the mindful leader and everything that comes with that. And so what does that mean for you, Drayton, and what does that mean for your clients as you talk about this topic?
It's interesting. So I've got my book here, and this book that I use, it's got all my client notes, etc. It's worth a lot of money if I open this up and show you. I'm kidding. In every instance over the last 3 weeks, I write at the because I make pre-conversation notes. And in every instance, I've put at the top of the starting of the conversation, it's important words that I want to make sure that we get out front and center when we have our conversations. It's vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity. And I think of a mindful leader, back to what we were talking about, is living in the present moment. I think all these three things in particular embody that and personify it in these leaders. If you're going to be a mindful leader and you're showing up in the present moment and
Mm-hmm.
being of service, we talk about that extensively. Of the mindful leader shows up to be of service. It's not about our ego. It's not about us. It's not about our agenda. It's about being of service. And these three things, vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity, are just cornerstones of those things. And I think, we touched on the fear piece before. This vulnerability piece is so important now for folks, in that to offer up and become real. When I was coming through the corporate ranks, we literally were expected to be 10 feet tall and bulletproof. you know, we had all the answers, and we had to be, above reproach, and we had to, have this certain air about us that we were infallible because we were leaders. Again, it comes from that military corporate structure thing, that's just the way it worked when I came up through the ranks. And now it's a different world, and the people don't relate to leaders that are like that. In fact, they flee from leaders that are like that, the old autocratic command and control, and orders cascade down from above. They want real people. And if you look at the data that's out there in terms of the most successful CEOs, there's been wonderful studies done on this based on stock price and return to shareholders. The best CEOs are the ones that are the real people. They view them as kind of that humble guy next door type thing, that you'd be a friend with, that's vulnerable, that's self-deprecating, that's super authentic, and what you see is what you get. And so working with our leaders now in terms of, it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. It takes a lot of courage when we're talking about fear to say, I'm afraid. It takes a lot of courage to say, I don't know. And that's all part of this vulnerability piece, and that you have to just be real with folks, especially during times like we're going through. And you can't feed them a line of corporate crap. You feed them a line of corporate crap, you're going to lose all credibility with these folks going forward. When the job market comes back, your good people are going to leave because they see right through that.
Yeah.
And people today don't expect you to have all of the answers, and they don't expect you to be, they expect you to be above reproach, because you should have those values. You should have integrity. And that's hopefully why you got to the position you did. But they don't think that you don't have problems, and they know that you're real. And we just have to admit that. That's, don't pretend that you don't have any problems. Don't pretend that you have all the answers. Just give me the straight truth. And in times like this, one of the most important things from position leadership is to tell people the truth, no matter what it is. If it's bad news, then tell them the bad news. And then rally them around, this is how we're going to address it collectively. But do not feed them a line of crap. Be authentic, be vulnerable, be completely transparent with people. And because a lot of people now are, we hear from a lot of folks, like, we're hearing from all our people that they're worried the company's going to be around. I mean, that's a big fear for a lot, even big companies that may not make it and probably won't make it through the next few months. And so what do you do with that? Well, you better be real with your people. And you better circle the wagons and figure out how you can do something about it too. But first off, you have to be real with your folks, because it's kind of like, we underestimate our children and our pets in many ways. It's like, okay, you're talking this way and your kid's getting something that's, way above what you're talking to them about. So we don't want to underestimate anybody, and don't assume that you know more than others, because a lot of people see right through you.
Yeah, I think the phrase that we love to use, which is so relevant right now, is head and heart leadership.
Yeah.
And making sure that when you're having conversations, when you're making decisions, when you're, again, just moving through your day, you're operating with both of those in mind, and not just operating from that head space, but you're incorporating that heart piece too. And I think that will get you to authentic, transparent, and vulnerable place. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is such an important thing for leaders
Mm-hmm.
to think about, and really, when you distill this down, that may be the metamorphosis that's happening. We've gone
Mm-hmm.
from this militaristic corporate structure, and it's autocratic, and it's very head dominant in terms of, metrics and all the math and all the strategy and all these kind of clinical things. And now coming out this side of it, it's the heart piece, in terms of, can we reach people in that heartfelt place right now and lead them out of this with a heart-based leadership bias that is new and different. I think that kind of says it all.
Maybe it's a great place for us to end the conversation then.
Let's do
Yeah.
so.
Cool. Well, thanks for the chat. I hope everyone else enjoys our conversation, and let's do this more. Let's have more of these conversations. I think they're really important throughout this process. So I
Yeah.
hope you continue to be safe and well, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.